The moment Jesus told you to turn the other cheek, he handed you a weapon. Turn the other cheek, you've heard it 1,000 times, and almost every time it meant be quiet, endure, absorb the blow. Sermons have called it patience, devotionals have called it grace, but the Greek text Jesus spoke from calls it something else entirely. That reading shaped centuries of Christian teaching, but the oldest manuscripts tell a different story. 1st century Galilee, 30 CE. Roman soldiers were not a distant threat, they were present on every road, in every marketplace. A man named Joseph, a quarry worker from Capernaum, had been struck that morning, not in a fight, by routine. The blow was a backhand, rhapizō in Greek, not a punch between equals, a deliberate social gesture, the blow reserved for inferiors. In Roman social law, you backhanded a slave, a servant, a subject too low to be struck as a peer. There's a detail in the background of this world that scholars rarely emphasize. Jewish law had already priced the shame of a backhand. The Mishnah's tractate Bava Kamma assigned monetary damages for shame. A backhanded blow carried twice the fine of a fist. If turning the other cheek was Jesus' response to this world, then what you've been told it means may have cost you something real. Matthew 5:39. The Greek word Jesus uses for resist is anthistēmi, and it does not mean passive endurance. Anthistēmi means do not meet violence with violence in kind. It does not mean do nothing. Jesus isn't telling Joseph to absorb the blow silently. He's telling him, don't fight back on Rome's terms. There's a third option. We established in our Good Samaritan episode how Jewish law encoded radical social boundary crossing. But what we didn't examine was what happened when Jesus turned that same precision on Roman power. Here's the mechanism. If a right-handed soldier backhands you on the right cheek, turning the left cheek presents a choice he wasn't prepared for. To strike the left cheek cleanly, the soldier must use his left hand, the hand Roman culture reserved for unclean acts. Or he uses his right hand as a punch, between equals, which is a completely different act under Roman law. There are two ways scholars read what Jesus intends here. The first, this is purely psychological, a dignity claim. The second, this is a legal trap built from Jewish law. The answer changes everything. Roman honor culture ran entirely on a binary. You were above someone or below them. There was no gesture for a cross. The backhand wasn't violence in the legal sense, it was a social classification. It said, you are beneath the level where law protects you. So when Jesus says, turn the other cheek, he's addressing a man who has just been legally erased, and he's giving him a move the system never anticipated. Joseph sat at the road's edge that morning, processing what had happened. He had not fought back, but he hadn't turned the cheek either. He had looked away. The verb Jesus uses for turn is strephō, an active verb, not passive submission, an intentional physical movement. Looking away is passive, but turning to offer the other cheek requires the body to face the person who just struck you. That is a different act entirely. To turn and offer the other cheek is to stand upright and present yourself as someone who cannot be socially erased. It is a declaration. If this is what Jesus meant, then every Christian who absorbed injustice as a spiritual duty wasn't imitating Christ. They were imitating Joseph before he heard the sermon. So we have the Greek, anthistēmi, rhapizō, strephō. The words describe a strategic, active, legal response to imperial violence. This seems complete. Yosef had heard the teaching by nightfall, and he was furious because it sounded exactly like what he'd always been told: be quiet, endure. But here's the problem with that reading and why we need to go deeper into the legal framework Jesus was working inside. The Sermon on the Mount was almost certainly preached in Aramaic, and the underlying word for offer is pnei, to present your face as a deliberate act of witness. And we return briefly to Bava Kamma because there's a clause in the shame damage laws that maps precisely onto this gesture. Scholars have mostly treated it as a coincidence. Bava Kamma 8:6 specifies that if an inferior deliberately presents their face to receive a blow, the shaming liability transfers to the one who strikes. The moment Yosef turns and offers the left cheek, under Jewish law, the soldier is no longer the aggrieved party. Yosef is. So the answer seems clear. Turning the other cheek is a dignity claim, a psychological move that forces the oppressor to see your humanity. Complete, satisfying. Except there's a problem. That reading still leaves the soldier a choice. But the Aramaic pnei and Bava Kamma 8:6 together don't give him one. The dignity reading is true, but incomplete. What Jesus was constructing wasn't just a personal response, it was a legal mechanism embedded in existing Jewish law. Under the honor-shame economy Jesus operated in, a deliberate pine, a witnessed presentation of the face, initiated a legal liability event, not just an emotional one. These confrontations happened publicly, in markets, at gates, on roads. Witnesses were always present, and witnesses were the activation mechanism for shame law. Before we reach the answer, there is a cost. If Jesus designed this as a legal weapon, then every time someone told you to just endure, they weren't giving you Jesus. The belief you may need to release is this: that Christian meekness is the same as Christian powerlessness. They are not the same thing. They were never the same thing. Jesus spoke these words to people living under systemic imperial violence. What he gave them was not a spiritual coping mechanism, it was a precision instrument. With the left cheek presented, the soldier faces 3 choices, all of them bad for him. Strike left-handed, punch as an equal, or walk away. Left-handed, the empire's shame falls on him. Punch as an equal, he's elevated Yosef's legal status. Walk away, he's conceded in public. And here, the shadow thread converges. Bava Kamma 8:6 wasn't background context, it was the architecture. Jesus didn't invent a new teaching, he cited Jewish law. At Rome, Jesus handed a man with no legal standing a legal move. He built a weapon out of the empire's own law and placed it in the hands of the powerless. Turning the other cheek doesn't mean accepting the blow. It means changing what the blow means under the only law Rome actually feared, its own. Sit with that for a moment. This teaching, which has been read as surrender for 2,000 years, was written as a legal brief against imperial power. Yosef stood in his courtyard that night, and for the first time he understood. Jesus wasn't asking him to absorb Rome, he was asking him to outmaneuver it. Every sermon that called this submission had the word. What it didn't have was the legal world the word lived inside. Roman writers recorded Jewish subjects using exactly this kind of legal judo, asymmetric resistance through the empire's own procedural frameworks. Jesus wasn't rejecting law, he was weaponizing the intersection of Jewish and Roman law at the exact point where empire was most vulnerable, its own need for honor. Every empire depends on the compliance of those it controls. The moment compliance becomes strategic, the empire's power structure begins to shift. The Sermon on the Mount wasn't a list of spiritual postures, it was a tactical curriculum given to people who had no army, no vote, and no legal voice under Roman law. Nonviolence in the hands of Jesus was not the absence of power, it was the most sophisticated deployment of available power by someone who understood exactly which rules Rome couldn't break. Every person who has ever chosen not to retaliate, not from fear, but from strategy, has been doing something older than Christianity. They have been outmaneuvering the system on the system's terms. Jesus saw the gap between what Rome claimed to be and what Rome actually was, and he built a doorway through that gap for every person who had nothing but their body and their dignity. This teaching traveled across the Roman Empire, and everywhere it landed, it gave systematically powerless people a move that power couldn't anticipate. So what does this mean, here, now, in a world where the oppressor may not wear armor, but absolutely still depends on your compliance? The first application: identify the script your opposition needs you to follow. The backhand only functions if you respond with either submission or retaliation. Jesus teaches a third path. Submit, you confirm their power. Retaliate, you fight on their terms. Turn the cheek, you force them to interact with you as an equal or not at all. This is not passive resistance, this is strategic non-compliance, a move so precisely designed that it exposes the machinery of domination to everyone watching. Remember, the witnesses are still the activation mechanism. Principled non-retaliation is most powerful when it's public because the audience sees exactly who broke the script. Joseph tried it the next week. He didn't walk away unscathed, but he walked away for the first time without having been erased. This teaching doesn't promise safety. It promises something harder and more durable than safety. It promises that you will not be complicit in your own erasure. What the original text says, what anthistēmi and strephō and pnei together say, is far more radical and far more freeing than what you were handed. Here's where application gets personal. Some read this as a community practice. You use this move collectively, publicly, in organized witness. Others read it as an individual spiritual discipline. You do this alone, privately, with God as witness. The answer you choose changes how you live this. And here, the honest question this channel keeps returning to: can knowing what a word originally meant actually change how you live? Or does the original always stay at arm's length from the ordinary day? Joseph didn't have a theology degree. He had a backhand and a teaching, and a moment where he had to choose whether the teaching was real. The practice: before you react, identify which response they're scripted for, then choose the one that removes their script, not to win, to remain. This isn't a demand to be heroic, it's an invitation to be precise. Jesus didn't ask you to absorb the system, he showed you where the system has no answer. The crowd that came down from that hillside was not calmed. They were armed with a move Jesus had pulled directly from the legal fabric of the world they lived in. Early Christian communities across the empire deployed this exact posture, documented in Roman sources as a systematic refusal to participate in the script of imperial domination. Somewhere between the Aramaic hillside and the Latin translations and the centuries of sermons that followed, a weapon became a wound. Joseph, by the accounts we can reconstruct, became a man known in his community for standing without retreating. He didn't become a soldier, he became something more dangerous, a man who knew the rules. Jesus didn't teach the powerless to endure empire, he taught them to embarrass it. If Jesus designed this as a systemic resistance mechanism, not just a personal one, then what does that mean for how the church engaged every empire it lived inside? That door we haven't opened yet. We followed Joseph from the moment of the backhand to the morning he understood what Jesus actually gave him. But Joseph's story doesn't end there. You now know how to use nonviolent defiance against your oppressors, but Jesus also demands that you actively care for the people you are culturally conditioned to hate. Click the video on the screen right now to learn why the Good Samaritan is a terrifying story.